Apothecary Tarnis of the Howling Griffons examines a Carcharodon gene seed sample taken from a fallen brother during the joint defense of Karis Cephalon, 803.M41. He has run this assay 240 times in his career. He knows what Raven Guard gene stock looks like at the chromosomal level. He knows what every founding chapter's variant looks like. The slide under his oculus is not a Raven Guard variant. It is not a variant at all. It is original Primarch-tier gene material, diluted, but diluted across exactly one biological generation. Tarnis seals the assay, classifies it Vermilion, and walks it to his chapter master. The chapter master reads it, says nothing, and burns it himself. Hold what Tarnis saw on the slide. Hold the burn. We are going to come back to both, and what we come back to will not be what you assume it is. The thesis of this video is a heresy. It is the most heretical thesis this channel has built. It says that Tyberos the Red, Wake, chapter master of the Carcharodon's Astra, master of the battle barge Nikor, holder of 2 ranks the chapter only barely allows to be held by one man, is the biological son of the 11th Primarch. Not the gene seed son, not the spiritual son, the biological son, fathered before the 11th's purge, hidden among the Carcharodons since unification. The reason the Carcharodons exist as a chapter is to be the bottle around the bloodline they were assembled around. The audience under our Cryo Vault video reached this thesis before we did.
A specific comment under that video said, and I am quoting it directly, "I think Tyberos is the direct biological son of one of the lost Primarchs, conceived through procreation, which was his great crime that needed to be covered up. After he was banished, his sons were interred and mixed with the Raven Guard." A second comment under our Rogel Dorn video sharpened the same blade. Only a crime of passion would be so shameful. This video takes those 2 comments seriously and builds the case the published canon refuses to build for itself. We begin where the case has to begin. We begin with the canon's official position on Astartes reproduction, because if that position is absolute, the thesis dies on the first beat. The official position is that Astartes do not reproduce, sexually, biologically, at all. The Adeptus Mechanicus and the published Imperial gene seed literature are unambiguous on this point.
A Space Marine's genetic enhancements are somatic, not germline, meaning they enhance the cells of the Marine's own body but do not pass to any offspring he might theoretically father. The implants are surgical and prosthetic, not heritable. The progenoid glands, 2 per Marine, 1 in the neck and 1 in the chest, are the only canonical reproductive pathway for gene seed itself, and they reproduce by cellular cloning of the existing implants, not by the merging of 2 parental genomes. The progenoids are harvested at death by the chapter's apothecary using the reductor attachment of the narthecium. That is the official biology. That is what they teach the apprentices on Mars. Astartes do not breed. But the canon contradicts itself in published novels. Joshua Reynolds, Black Library, 2018. The novel called Lucas the Trickster. Lucas, a space wolf of Fenris, the chapter's official jester and resident agent of chaos, is described in that novel as having illegitimate children scattered across his homeworld and as secretly maintaining his own descendants. The text is explicit. The text is published. The text contradicts the official Mechanicus position. Either Lucas is the canonical exception that proves the rule, or the rule is not actually a rule, and the Mechanicus position is enforcement, not biology. The author wrote the bloodline in. The author left it canon. The Mechanicus has not retracted it. So even at the standard Astartes tier, the lowest tier of post-human modification, the level at which sterility is supposed to be most rigorously enforced, the canon admits one named exception, one published, sourced, on-shelf exception. Now climb one rung up the modification ladder, from Astartes to Primarch. The Primarchs were not gene-modified men. The Primarchs were grown.
The Emperor built them in the gene laboratories under the Himalayan range during the late M30 period.
They were grown to be tactical demigods, each one a one-off, each one designed to lead a legion of his own kind. Their physiology was not the Astartes modified human baseline. Their physiology was the Astartes modified human baseline pushed an order of magnitude further. They were faster, larger, more durable, more cognitively gifted. They aged on a different scale. They survived wounds that would atomize a space marine. Several of them, Vulcan being the named example, were perpetuals. Beings whose cellular regeneration is so total they cannot be permanently killed by physical force. Conrad Kurz, during the heresy, tried to kill Vulcan over a span of solar months. He could not. Vulcan reconstituted every time. That is canonical. That is in the published Black Library record. That is not in dispute.
And here is what the audience comment was reaching for, the part that the official Mechanicus position does not address. If Astartes tier biology admits one canonical exception to the sterility rule, Lucas of Fenris, then Primarch-tier biology, which operates one rung above Astartes tier biology in every measurable dimension, would admit what? Would it admit a stricter rule? Or would it admit the obvious, that demigods who can regenerate from atoms might also be able to do the much simpler thing, which is to father a child? The published canon on this specific question is silent. Not silent as in, the question was raised and answered no. Silent as in, the question was never permitted to enter the published record. That silence is the data point, and the silence is not random. Of every other physiological capacity the Primarchs are documented as possessing, combat performance, cognitive scale, longevity bands, regeneration, psychic potential, the canon documents some boundary, some test case, some named limit. On reproduction, the canon is asymmetrically silent. There is no documented test. There is no named limit. The Mechanicus and the Black Library have, collectively, across 5 decades of published lore, simply not addressed the question. That asymmetry, in a published lore base this dense, is itself the artifact of a deliberate redaction. The thing the published record refuses even to test is the thing the published record fears the test would confirm. What the audience has done is read that silence forward. The audience has noted Vulcan the Perpetual. The closest canon comes to a Primarch whose biology is functionally immortal at the cellular level, and asked, if biology like that is possible, what stops biology like that from reproducing?
The published Annandale novel, Vulcan, Lord of Drakes, the 9th Primarchs volume, does not answer the question. The Salamander's canonical relationship with their mortal Nocturnian families does not answer the question, because the canonical answer there is that the Salamander's kinfolk produce mortal kinfolk, not Astartes. The Lucas exception does not answer the question because Lucas is one tier below where the thesis lives. Nothing in the published record answers the question. The question lives in the silence between the published facts, and the silence is exactly the size and shape of the thesis under examination. What if the silence is silence on purpose? What if the silence is a redaction? Hold that with the burn the Howling Griffons chapter master performed on Tarnis's slide. The instinct to destroy the evidence is the instinct of someone who knows what the evidence says. Now consider what reframing the silence does to the rest of the Lost Primarchs file.
The official Imperial position is that the 2nd and 11th Primarchs were censured via an Edict of Obliteration, a damnatio memoriae in High Gothic, the most thorough erasure the Imperium has ever executed. Their names were removed, their statues were broken, their legion's battle honors were scrubbed from the ledgers. 2 plinths in the investiary on Holy Terra stand empty for a reason that has never been recorded. Dan Abnett, in the Siege of Terra short story, The Lightning Tower, gives Rogel Dorn the line. The 2nd and 11th plinths had been vacant for a long time. No one ever spoke of those 2 absent brothers. Their separate tragedies had seemed like aberrations. Separate tragedies. 2 events, not one. The Imperium will not say what the events were. The audience has reframed the silence. The audience has said, rebellion is a political crime, and the Imperium has well-developed bureaucratic methods for naming and punishing rebellion. The heresy itself was a rebellion, and the Imperium named every traitor Primarch on every monument it could find, in red ink and worse. If the Lost were rebels, they would be named as rebels. They are not named as rebels. They are not named at all. The silence is not the silence of a political crime. It is the silence of a biological transgression so categorical that even putting the crime in the ledger would be propagating the knowledge of its possibility. The crime, the audience hypothesis runs, was procreation. The Lost Primarchs had children, children of demigods. Half-Primarchs walking among the legions the Emperor was assembling for his Great Crusade. And the Emperor's response was not the response of a politician handling a rebellious son. It was the response of an engineer handling a contaminated batch. He erased the line. He erased the line's witnesses. He erased the line's records. He left 2 empty plinths. You see the structural argument. Rebellion produces accusations. Procreation produces denials. The Imperium has issued only denials. This is, to be fully clear, an audience thesis. It is not a Black Library statement. The published canon does not say, the crime of the Lost was procreation. The published canon says nothing at all about what the crime was. The reframing belongs to the audience under our Cryovault and Rogel Dorn videos. And this channel is taking it seriously because the canon's silence, the canon's specific, total, unrelieved silence on what one of the most consequential erasures in Imperial history actually erased, is exactly the silence a redaction of that magnitude would produce. The thesis fits the shape of the whole. That is all the thesis claims, but the fit is precise. Now turn the file over and look at Tyberos. Tyberos the Red Wake was first introduced to the canon in Imperial Armor Volume 10, The Badab War Part 2, published by Forge World in 2010 under Alan Bly's editorial hand. In that text, he is described under his original Forge World designation as First Captain Tiberon, the name later standardized to Tyberos. He is recorded as the force commander of the Carcharodon's Astra's unlooked-for intervention in the Badab War in 910 M41. He fights through that campaign with 2 relic gauntlets, Hunger and Slake, combinations of lightning claw, chain fist blade, and power weapon, mounted on adamantium gauntlets and possessed by the chapter for an unknown length of time. He holds the rank of Chapter Master, the rank of First Company Master, and the title of Shade Lord simultaneously. He is described, on the rare occasions he removes his helmet, in IA Volume 10's own quoted words as, and I am reading the published canon directly, a corpse-white nightmare with half the bones of the face exposed in a bloodless grimace,
while his eyes are a soulless, depthless black. That is the canonical description. Now, stack the anomalies the canon itself records around it.
Anomaly 1. The Weapons. A Volume 10 records that hunger and slake are ancient relics, and notes, again in direct paraphrase from the published text, there are whispers within the chapter that this pair of ancient lightning claws once belonged to the Raven Guard Legion's 18th chapter, though their exact origins remain mysterious. The chapter master of the Carcharodons is using weapons that predate the chapter's claimed founding by whichever founding number you happen to accept, and the published canon openly refuses to commit on where they came from. Whispers within the chapter. Origins remain mysterious. The chapter cannot explain its own chapter master's gauntlets. Anomaly 2. The Ship. The Nicor is a heavily modified Charybdis-class Grand Cruiser of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, a Grand Cruiser from the Crusade. Currently in the possession of a chapter whose latest possible founding date is M36, and whose earliest possible founding date is the second founding immediately after the heresy. Tyberos commands her personally. He has been commanding her for as long as the published record records him commanding the chapter. Anomaly 3. The Age. Neither Forge World nor Black Library will give Tyberos an age. Both of Robbie McNiven's Carcharodon's novels, Red Tive, 2017, set on the prison colony Zartak, and Outer Dark, 2018, set on Piety 5, treat Tyberos as already ancient, already mythic, already the singular memory of the chapter, and refuse to date him. This is a discipline. The Astartes catalog is not silent on the ages of its other chapter masters. Marnius Calgar's age is a public record. Dante's age is a published number. Tyberos has no number. The publishers have observed silence on his age on multiple occasions across multiple writers across more than a decade of publication. Silence at that consistency is policy. Anomaly 4. The Gene Seed. Volume 10 describes the Carcharodon's gene seed as unusually pure, stable. The dark eyes, the same text says, and I want you to hear this exactly, are unlikely to be the result of mutation. Read that. The published canonical source on the Carcharodons looks at the symptom every reader assumes is Raven Guard ashblind, the published Raven Guard gene seed defect that produces black eyes, and says, no, not mutation. Then the canon stops talking about it. It offers no replacement explanation. It documents the symptom, denies the obvious cause, and falls silent on what the actual cause might be. Forge World has, in writing, refused to attribute the trait to the parent legion the same text alleges the chapter descended from. That is not negligence. That is a deliberately placed hole. Anomaly 5. The Chief Librarian. Tekahurangi, the pale nomad of the Carcharodons, is, by IA Volume 10's own admission, only 3 generations removed from the original exiles. 3 Astartes generations is a measurable thing. 3 Astartes generations from the original exiles, if we are honest about the words, puts the original exiles within living oral memory of Marines who still draw breath in the chapter today. That is not a chapter founded a few centuries ago from regular Raven Guard stock. That is a chapter whose oral tradition reaches into a recorded silence, back into the time before the Imperium decided what the chapter would be called. Anomaly 6. The Titles. Shade Lord for the Chapter Master. Pale Nomad for the Chief Librarian. Both titles were used during the late Great Crusade. Shade Lord was the title of Arcas-Phal, an exiled Raven Guard Legion Master expelled before the Horus Heresy.
Pale Nomads was a cognomen the Luna Wolves used for the Terran exiles of that same era.
The Carcharodons preserve both titles, with the original spellings and the original role assignments in unbroken continuity, 10,000 years after the Imperium decided to stop talking about those exiles in writing. A chapter founded in M36 from regular Raven Guard stock does not preserve titles from the late Great Crusade with that level of fidelity. A chapter that was there does. 6 anomalies. Read them as the canon presents them. Individually, they are intriguing flavor. Read them as a stack. They are a footnote written by someone who knows. But notice what kind of bloodline they describe. The anomalies do not describe the bloodline of a lost legion of normal Astartes. The weapons predate the chapter. The ship predates the chapter. The chapter master's age cannot be dated. The gene seed is denied the only mutation explanation available. The chief librarian's oral tradition reaches into the crusade. The titles preserve the names of Terran exiles. These are not the anomalies of a chapter whose legion was redistributed.
These are the anomalies of a chapter built around one organism whose presence in the chapter predates the chapter, whose biology cannot be reconciled to the alleged parent legion's profile, whose weapons and ship are older than the chapter is supposed to be. The chapter is not the survival of a legion. The chapter is a vessel, and the vessel was built around one passenger. Hold that, because the next move is what makes the whole thing land. If the chapter is a vessel built around one passenger, the chapter has to have features that protect the passenger. Look at the features. The Carcharodons are fleet-based. They follow the nomad predation pattern, an operational doctrine the Forge World text describes as evolved for Astartes formations operating beyond the Imperium's boundaries for extended periods, and as entirely self-contained, capable of sustaining itself without any Imperial support.
Why is that protective? Because a fleet-based chapter on the nomad predation pattern files no fixed fortress address. The Imperium cannot send an inspection team to a planet. There is no planet. There is the outer dark, and the chapter is somewhere in it. A bloodline you wanted to keep off the records would not live on a fortress moon with a fixed coordinate. A bloodline you wanted to keep off the records would live on a battle barge that moved. The Carcharodons take their recruits from the feral and feudal worlds of the Maelstrom Zone, with permission granted during the Badab campaign and never revisited. That recruitment grants the chapter a permanent gene pool draw that the Adeptus Terra does not audit. The Adeptus Terra does not know the worlds. The Adeptus Terra does not know the candidates. The chapter selects. The chapter inducts. The chapter never explains. A bloodline you wanted to dilute slowly across centuries would draw new gene stock from a pool the Imperium did not have on file. The Carcharodons refuse the standard Codex resupply allocations. They do not take Mechanicus pattern equipment along standard supply lines. They do not file the battle honor paperwork required to draw replacement gene seed from the Apothecarian. They take what they need on the way, from the wreckage of dead chapters, from the relics of contested holds, from the worlds they cross. They keep their interaction with the Imperial apparatus minimal. A bloodline you wanted to protect from cross-referencing by some future investigator would refuse standardized cross-referencing. It would refuse to feed the ledger that could one day be searched against. The Carcharodons disappear into the maelstrom for decades and reappear. They cycle. The published record documents the disappearances and the reappearances and treats the duration as the chapter's prerogative. The chapter's prior parent, and here the chapter's prior parent means the cryovault thesis we built in the originator video, would explain the rotation as warden duty over something hidden in the maelstrom. That thesis is consistent with this one and we will return to it.
But the rotation also serves a simpler function. A chapter that disappears for decades cannot be questioned for decades. A bloodline whose carrier disappeared for decades at a time would be a bloodline the questioning bureaucracy would lose interest in long before the carrier reappeared. The chapter is small. It cannot field successor chapters. It does not seem to want to. Its gene stock, the published text says, degrades. If the chapter were the surviving 11th Legion intact, it would have hundreds of thousands of Marines and would have produced dozens of successor chapters. It has done neither. The thesis that the chapter is a lost Legion survival does not fit those numbers.
The thesis that the chapter is a vessel built around one bloodline does fit them perfectly. You build a vessel large enough to hide one organism and his immediate kin. You do not build a vessel large enough to hide an army. This is where the audience comment reading becomes load-bearing. The originator comment said, after he was banished, his sons were interred and mixed with the Raven Guard. The audience extension claim is that when the 11th Primarch was purged, his sons, the Marines of his legion who would, in this reading, carry one diluted increment of his Primarch-tier gene stock, were redistributed under cover. The cover, the comment says, was attribution to the Raven Guard.
The 11th's gene seed entered the Raven Guard founding rolls, not as a separate accounted-for stream, but as quiet contamination, and the resulting hybrid lineage, Raven Guard on paper, something else, in fact, was the lineage that later, by some path the records do not show, became the Carcharodon's Astra. The published canon does not confirm this. The published canon explicitly refuses to commit to a parent legion for the Carcharodons. Forge World writes, alleged Raven Guard successor, and leaves it there. The Index Astartes list of Raven Guard's second founding successors, Raptors, Revilers, Blackguard, does not contain the Carcharodons. The Carcharodons are not on that list. They are alleged to descend from a parent that did not list them as a descendant. The published canon also refuses the Raven Guard mutation explanation for the Carcharodon's eyes. The Raven Guard have a documented ash-blind/sable-brand defect that produces black eyes. The Carcharodons have a chapter affliction they call the blindness, which looks the same. IA Volume 10 says, the Carcharodons is not the Raven Guards. Same symptom, different cause. The published canon refuses to explain what the cause is. So the picture the official canon paints in negative space is this. A chapter alleged to descend from a parent legion that did not list it as a successor, with a gene trait the parent legion has a documented version of, which the canon explicitly denies is the same trait, with a chapter master whose age cannot be dated, with weapons and a ship that predate the chapter's claimed founding, with a chief librarian whose oral tradition reaches into the Great Crusade, with titles preserved from the late Crusade Terran exile period, with a doctrine evolved for operating beyond Imperial supply lines, with a recruitment grant from a region the Adeptus Terra does not audit, with rotation patterns the chapter sets itself. That is not the picture of a Raven Guard successor. That is the picture of a deliberately constructed cover. The cover is not subtle. The cover is, by Imperial standards, almost ostentatious in its irregularity. The fact that the Imperium permits the cover to continue, that the High Lords have not, in 10,000 years, sent the Inquisition to disassemble the chapter and explain it, is itself a data point. The Imperium leaves the Carcharodons alone. The Imperium knows the Carcharodons are anomalous. The Imperium has had 10,000 years to disambiguate them, and has chosen instead to leave them in the outer dark and to not look. That is the conduct of an Imperium that has decided the chapter is more useful left unexplained than it would be exposed. Robute Guilliman's return makes the same point. Guilliman came back in M42. He has read the records the Imperium kept while he was in stasis.
He has reorganized the Imperial military around his Indomitus crusade.
He has integrated chapters across the galaxy into the Crusade's command structure. One of the chapters he has integrated, at least at the company level, is the Carcharodons. The published canon documents a Carcharodon's strike cruiser called the Matahe, commanded by Company Master Manfor, a taciturn and scarred warrior in the published phrase, operating within Fleet Secundus, Battle Group Bitaris, at the retaking of Castellus Sanctic on Budor 5. The Carcharodons fight inside Guilliman's chain of command, and then slide back into the void without explaining themselves further. Guilliman accepts the arrangement. Guilliman, who is by published reputation the most administratively competent of the surviving Primarchs, the architect of the Codex Astartes, the Primarch whose temperament is to audit and to systematize, has audited and systematized the Indomitus order of battle and has chosen to leave the Carcharodons substantially alone within it. The conduct fits the conduct of a Primarch who knows what Tyberos is,
and to whom the answer is, do not investigate the brother whose existence the file denies. The Primarch to half-Primarch courtesy is the courtesy of family. The canon does not document a face-to-face meeting between Guilliman and Tyberos. The canon documents the structural relationship, the chapter integrated, the chapter independent, the chapter unaudited. The courtesy is in the structure, which is where this thesis lands. This is where we synthesize back to the originator video. The cryo-vault thesis said, the Carcharodons rotate through the maelstrom because they are the wardens of two lost Primarchs sealed in cryostasis somewhere in that warp-distorted region, wardens placed there by the Emperor or his agents before the heresy, to keep the two erased brothers off the active board and out of the Imperium's questioning.
That thesis explained the rotation, explained the chapter's isolation,
explained why a chapter of this profile would specifically tolerate operating in the maelstrom rather than in clean Imperial space. The bloodline thesis nests inside the cryo-vault thesis perfectly. If the Carcharodons are the wardens of two lost Primarchs, the natural follow-up question is, why this chapter? Why is the warden duty assigned to a chapter whose own origin is undocumented, whose own chapter master cannot be dated, whose own gene seed will not match the parent legion the canon alleges? The bloodline thesis answers that. The warden is the kin. The warden is the line that, if the wards ever woke, would have a structural claim to be present at the waking. The cryo-vault held two Primarchs. The chapter master who guards them carries one of their lines. The duty assignment is the duty assignment of a guardian who is also a descendant. The Imperium did not choose a random chapter for the warden role.
The Imperium chose the chapter the bloodline already lived in,
because the bloodline was already there, and any other chapter would have been a wider risk. Tyberos is therefore not merely the warden of the cryo-vault. Tyberos is the living continuation of one of the bodies inside it. The cryo-vault holds two bodies. The chapter master who stands sentinel over the cryo-vault is the diluted by one generation, walking version of the same gene line as one of those bodies. The bodies and the warden are the same project at two physical states. The two states cover for each other. As long as the bodies stay in the vault, the Imperium can leave the warden alone. As long as the warden walks, the bodies stay outside the ledger. The arrangement has held for, by the canon's most generous accounting, 10,000 years. That arrangement is the arrangement the Howling Griffons apothecary slide threatened to break. Tarnis saw Primarch-tier gene material diluted across one biological generation.
He saw the bloodline.
He sealed the assay, classified it at the highest Imperial restriction code, walked it to his chapter master, and the chapter master, who is a Howling Griffons officer of the same codex tradition as Gilliman himself, read it, said nothing, and burned it. That burn is the conduct of a man who understood that the slide could not survive in the open record. The slide named what was in the dark. The slide had to go back into the dark. The chapter master burned the slide for the same reason the emperor erased the plinths. There is one more move to make, and it is the harder one, because it requires the script to honor a hedge the audience itself has placed on this thesis. The audience comments split. One comment names the 11th as the sire, another names the second. The thesis under examination is structural. It requires only that one of the lost is the biological father. It does not require resolving which. The cryo-vault thesis put both Primarchs in the vault. The bloodline thesis allows the bloodline to descend from either. The published canon, having erased both, gives us no internal evidence to prefer one over the other. We have weighted toward the 11th per the convergence of the more specific audience comment and the structural symmetry the title thesis prefers. But the case as a piece of structural argument does not collapse if it is the second instead. Either way, the carrier walks. Either way, the Imperium has spent 10,000 years not asking the question. Tyberos the Red Wake fights from the prow of his strike cruiser with 2 chained boarding blades and an oath of silence about his own age. He has commanded the Carcharodons for an unknown number of standard centuries. His armor is older than the chapter is supposed to be.
His gene seed is original Primarch-tier, diluted by 1 biological generation. And there is exactly 1 Primarch in 20,000 years of history whose gene seed would not show up in any official ledger to be cross-referenced. That Primarch's name is not in the records, so we cannot say it. But his son is in the records. His son is standing on a strike cruiser bridge somewhere out in the maelstrom, watching the warp and waiting for someone to ask the question correctly. The Imperium has avoided asking the question correctly for 38,000 years. Eventually, someone will.